And a lot of our issue could just be how dirty these clutches are. What's up, everybody? My name's Kyle and welcome to the LRT Outpost. Today we're back in the shop working on our Pro XP build here. Now, if you've been following along with the channel, we picked up this 2020 Pro XP off of Facebook Marketplace. Pretty solid unit, but when we took it for our test rip around the Outpost, kind of getting a little bit of a mystery noise. I feel like it's probably coming from the clutch. If you're not familiar, these early 2020 Pro XPs, 21s, 22s, even I think even early 2023s, they had a lot of issues with the clutching. The factory clutch was just garbage. So we're going to start by tearing into the clutch on this thing and hopefully fix that problem today. So let's get into it. All right, one of the things I do like about Polaris is they seem to be fairly easy to work on. So we're going to get access to our clutch cover. I'm just going to remove our vent tube here. There we go. All right. Alright, and Polaris did a cool thing with these. In the past, they were just like kind of plastic, almost like coarse threaded nuts like on my 900. And if you weren't careful, you could strip them out. And also you could lose them. And these, they don't separate. They're kind of like locked in. So you can't really lose them, which is pretty nice. You have enough room to pull the cover off. Get it out of the way. Plenty of room. Man, 900 is so much harder to wrestle. So upon initial inspection, I don't see anything too crazy. I may have gotten some felt over travel rub here and here. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and pull this primary and secondary and really inspect and see if we can see some rub marks or anything like that. So typically to remove the primary, there's actually, on most clutch setups on these things, it would actually be a bolt very similar to the secondary right here. But this actually has a T60 star bit, or Torx, whatever you want to call it. And typically you can just throw an impact on it and break it loose. But as you can see, I was not able to do that, so I actually had to stick a pry bar through and make sure you get on your post on the clutch. You don't want to go in between the two posts. You want to go on the outside here. Just don't go in between them because your spring and everything's in there. And I was able to hit that cross member down there to lock that in place. And I've always been told, be real careful not to let the primary rotate backwards. I've always been told that on, I think, all RZR units for the most part, because there's a risk you could like cause it to maybe jump timing or get out of timing that way. So try to be real careful, make sure you don't rotate that primary backwards. Don't know how true that is. This is what I've always seen and been told over the years, so it's just something that I try to take care of, and I've never had any issues. I mean, it doesn't hurt anything to be like cautious about it, I guess. So I end up having to take a breaker bar, break that loose. Should be able to get this the rest of the way out with just my impact. Okay, so previous models you wouldn't have this inner bolt. It would just be an outer one, like I said earlier, on the secondary, and you would just put in a clutch puller tool and it would just pop the primary off. This one's not quite like that. Sometimes you can give it a little whack on the outside and a little pull and it might pop off. As tight as that bolt was up there earlier, I doubt that's what's going to happen, but we're going to give that a shot first and then I'll show you what to do if that doesn't work. Oh, it did move. Okay. I think we may have gotten lucky by ours pulled out without it. Well, both sheaves were supposed to come out together, so we may have a problem there. But if you don't, if the hammer trick doesn't work, you have to remove this top section and pull it off and use a clutch puller. Once you got the primary out of the way, get the secondary. Pull your bolt. You should have multiple shims. Different units have different number of shims, so just kind of watch out. All right, we got a lot of rust in here. And there's rust on these shims, but this rust in here is concerning. So let's see if we can get this off. There we go. All right, cool. Okay, got some rust on the shaft here. Clean that up some. It just kind of looks like maybe they didn't clean it out like they should have. Definitely this little black smudge mark. That's belt rub right there. Oh, I got quite a bit right there. Look at that spot. All that. That's belt rub. So now that we got the secondary and everything else out of the way, we're going to use our clutch puller. And the clutch puller is different for the Pro XP clutches, the P90X clutch. So if you have a Polaris clutch puller laying around for like an older model, even an older turbo model, it probably doesn't fit. So just kind of double check that. So hopefully this will get this other half of the primary off of here. There we go, finally. All right. So now we got all the factory stuff out. I want to show you kind of some of the issues with these factory clutches. The reason why you can't pull it out with a regular clutch puller, this is the primary, is because you have this center kind of piece. And it's actually held on by an O-ring, but it can't come off until you take this top part off here. And that's where your spring and stuff is at. So the clutch puller won't fit in there because of that. So like I was saying earlier, if you can't pull this off like by giving it a few taps and yanking on it like I did, you have to take this part off and pull all this out, and you have to watch out. There's a couple little, you can see them, a couple little washers in there. Pull this and the spring and everything out, and then you can put the clutch puller and pull the sheaves off that way. So the main issues with the factory clutches, the P90X primary that comes in these units was just a weak design. They would literally explode, destroy your belt box, cause all kinds of extra damage. So obviously, very bad. So Polaris did issue a stop rod. They tried to do a couple of fixes like adding some stainless steel sliders, but with the open towers here, it just couldn't hold up to the power. So they never really quite fixed that issue. The other issue is you would get belt over travel. You may have heard me say that earlier, where the belt would actually rub on the either the tops or the bottom of the CVT housing itself. It's just where the belt like travels out too far outside of the clutch and it'll rub the housing. So they tried installing like a limit washer just to keep that travel down some. That also didn't always fix that problem either. The other issue was belt slip, and that usually was the culprit of the secondary clutch. It just had a weak spring in it. Polaris also tried to fix this by just adding in a stiffer secondary spring, and typically that just doesn't really work. There was still some belt slip issues in a lot of units, so that never really completely fixed the problem, obviously. When these aftermarket companies put together clutch kits, like you get a primary spring, secondary spring, weights, all that for a reason. They have designed it to work together as a package. Typically just slapping in a different weight spring isn't going to grant you very good results. But unfortunately that's what Polaris did. So they never really fixed the clutch problems. The other issue with the secondary was the bushing here that rides on the shaft would actually kind of walk out, and it could damage the seal to the input shaft of the transmission, cause some damage, obviously not good. So that was a bit of a problem. Some of the aftermarket companies, their secondaries have actually an encapsulated bushing, so it has like this plate so it can't walk out. And you can also, some companies are making like a cap you can just put on with these 3 bolts here. A lot of our issue could just be how dirty these clutches are. I don't think the previous owners really paid much attention to the clutch at all. You really should blow these things out and clean them out periodically. Dust and build up and everything, it just keeps them from working like they're supposed to. There's a lot of like smooth motion needs to happen. If they get bound up because something's gritty or grimy in there, it just makes for really rough shifting and everything. But other than the spring and that bushing, the secondary itself really isn't that bad. You can reuse the secondary and just get like that encapsulation plate for the bushing and update the spring and stuff, and you still got a pretty decent secondary to work with. The primary was the big issue with the, you know, So essentially, what it boils down to is there's only one real fix for all these problems. Now once you have your primary removed, and this is the important part, make sure you don't lose any of your pieces. We're going to pack it up all nice and neat. And then very carefully put it where it belongs. And then order yourself a new clutch. And that's exactly what we did. And for cost reasons, I actually went with the mother clutcher. So this is the Harvey ATV Parts mother clutcher primary and secondary upgrades for the Pro XP. And really, the reason why I did that is because it seemed like all the aftermarket companies were essentially doing the same thing. They were taking a clutch system from the previous turbo models, specifically the 2016 through 2020 models, and just retrofitting them to fit the Pro XP. And then they were throwing in their own little clutch kits and weights and doing their own little thing with them. So if all of them were essentially doing the same thing, I didn't really see a reason why I should pay double the price as, say, like the Aftermarket Assassins package. Now, with the Aftermarket Assassins, they say theirs is made out of tool steel, so I'm assuming they build part or some of their clutches or something like that. So there may be an argument it's a little bit stronger, and you do get their clutching and all that good stuff. But seeing as this is still a factory design clutch, if I want to, I can just put in the Aftermarket Assassin spring and weights and everything. So I'm not really at a loss. And I literally paid half the price through Harvey's ATV Parts. So we did get a nice upgraded primary. You can tell it's stronger because you get the encapsulated towers here. It has the upgraded heavy duty sliders and everything on the inside. It does have his primary spring and weights. We'll see how that operates. Like I said, we can always tune that out later, how we see fit. We also did get a brand new secondary. And I had to request this. I did email back and forth with them because I did not know this, but they were saying that that secondary bushing walking out wasn't always an issue for all models. I just told him I really wanted to have it just so I just didn't want to worry about it. I just wanted to take that completely out of the equation. I didn't ever want to have to worry about that. So this one does have the encapsulated bushing. You can see it's got this like little cap over it that'll keep that bushing from being able to walk out. I ordered the butter shift secondary washers from Aftermarket Assassins that we're going to throw in here. It just helps with spring binding. Basically just smooths out the shifting a little bit just so it's not quite so clunky. And we did go with their striker belt as well, which is really just a G-Boost belt, but supposedly there was some kind of partnership with the design of it or what have you. But anyways, we're going to get those washers installed into our secondary, get everything slapped back into the Pro here, and then we'll get a few heat cycles to break this belt in properly. And fingers crossed, that'll solve our problem. So to get these washers installed, you're gonna have to remove the helix, and there's a spring in here, so I'm gonna use my clutch spring compression tool. If you don't have one of these, you plan on doing your own stuff, you should get one. And I don't know if there's a specific way this cap's supposed to go back on, but I'm just going to mark it and make sure. We'll pull that top part off, pull this off. Watch out for your little spring spacer there. And then all we're going to do is you stack them, but you're going to take these little washers and we're just going to drop them right down in that little groove right there. So just stack those washers in there like that. And then our spring will go on top. Because when it compresses and expands, it kind of twists a little bit.
and allows that spring to not bind on that metal to metal contact, from my understanding. And it's supposed to help out a lot. And also, double stacking those washers like that, it adds just a little bit more tension to that secondary, which is also going to help improve belt grip. So it's almost like giving just a little bit of a stiffer spring. So now all we're going to do to put it back together is just tighten it back up. So when you replace this with one of the aftermarket clutches, you're going to need to remove this air baffle. It's just little Torx bits. I've already removed most of them, but we're going to go ahead and finish pulling this out. And save the bolts if you want to, but literally you can just try that. Okay, we got our washers installed in the secondary. Belt box is all cleaned out. So we're gonna go ahead and start by reinstalling the secondary. And you're gonna use your factory bolt and the main thick washer. So keep that. And also it comes with shims. So our factory one came off with about 6 shims, but since this is all new clutch, I'm going to start with 0 shims, and we're going to check our belt alignment once we get everything all dialed in. Just going to go ahead and pop this up there first. And there is a proper torque spec for these, obviously, but over the years I've just learned to use a little bit of trigger discipline and haven't had any issues. You do what you want. Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and install a new belt as well. It's a G-Boost belt. It's the Aftermarket Assassin's striker belt, like I was saying earlier. But what I do is I just go ahead and slip this on. Make sure your words are reading the right way. If you put it on backwards, it's not a big deal. Just make sure you always put it back on with the words backwards, because once you break these belts in a certain way, you always want to put it back on that same way. So it really doesn't matter which way you put them up there, but just to make it easier on yourself, just do it with the words facing the right way. So keep the secondary loose. Don't tighten it up all the way. You do have a belt change tool where you can kind of screw into this little threaded hole here. So it's like a little Allen key almost, but it's got threads on it, and it'll actually open up your secondary. But since I'm already right here, I'm just not going to tighten the bolt up all the way. That way the belt can go ahead and sit down inside the clutch. That way we can slip our primary in. So take the primary, slip it inside the belt first. And we just used the supplied bolt in the kit for the primary, and what it is, it's actually been shaved down. You can see how shallow that bolt head is. So they say to be careful, make sure you use the exact correct size socket to take these off, but that's for clearance on your belt box. So that's how they kind of retrofit these older clutches for this newer unit. They just had to make a couple little changes, and that's one of them right there. So just kind of be mindful of that. All right, now I'm going to tighten everything down. Now that everything's bolted in, we're going to crank the unit up and let the clutches kind of spin a little bit, and we're going to check our belt alignment. Okay, definitely got an issue going on there. The secondary should not have been spinning. So you probably could tell that the primary was spinning, but with it being in neutral or park, the secondary shouldn't be spinning at all at that point. So definitely going to have to check our belt alignment here. So to check the belt alignment, basically what we're going to do is just pull up the camera on our phone, and we're going to stick it in between the clutches, and I want to see where the belt is riding on the primary. And you're just going to stick your phone in here and see where the belt's riding. It looks to me like we are too close to the outside.
is pretty much touching this sheave right here on this side already. So what we're going to do is to get this secondary to push in closer that way, to get the belt to travel that way, we're going to add some of those shims. We're pretty far to that side, so I think I'm going to start with 2 and go from there. All right, crank it back up and see what we got. Alright, so that was a little bit better. You could see the primary was spinning, but the secondary, it started to spin at first, but then it was kind of like, it's kind of spinning at times and then stopping. So that lets us know we're kind of getting the belt dialed in. So we're going to keep repeating that process. Alright, I think we got it pretty well dialed in for now. We're going to put the belt cover back up here and put a couple heat cycles on this belt, and then we'll check the alignment again, because sometimes, you know, everything can kind of settle a little bit and you may have to make some adjustments later. Now you probably heard that this clutch is kind of loud. Mainly it's because the cover is off, but these P90XT clutches, because they kind of have a little bit of a free movement, they have that kind of tick or that kind of almost light knock sound at idle. As soon as you give it gas, it goes away, but they're just a little noisier, which is the complaint, but they're so much stronger, you shouldn't have to worry about the whole, you know, exploding thing. So the noise is a bit of a downside, but I'll live with it to know I have a reliable clutch in there. So that was a good first heat cycle on this belt. Everything seems to be working appropriately. Belt seems to be lined up all right, and that squealing noise is gone. So far, so good. Now we're going to go ahead and get a couple more heat cycles on that belt, and we'll go back and double check that belt alignment again, like I said earlier. Just make sure everything's still copacetic in there. But overall, I'm really impressed with that Harvey mother clutcher. So not only do you get the upgraded primary clutch, which is stronger, you don't have to worry about it exploding on you. You also get Harvey's upgraded primary spring. I was told there was also a limit washer to prevent that belt over travel, and their weights. So it's all set up. So you kind of get a little bit of a mild clutch kit to begin with. And also the secondary spring. We did install the aftermarket Assassin's butter shift washers, which also can add a little bit of tension to that spring. And you get the encapsulated bushing on that secondary as well, so we don't have to worry about that down the road. So overall, very impressed with the kit. Real good baseline for us to work with, and we'll probably do some tweaking down the road with it, I'm sure, as this build evolves. Now in our next video, we're going to continue with the RZR Pro Xp build here. Y'all may have noticed in the background of the video a stack of cardboard boxes. So we've got quite a few more goodies to add on to this build. But that's going to do it for this video. So if you want to follow along on this build as well as all my other projects, make sure you do me a favor, hit that like, hit that subscribe for me, and I'm going to catch you guys in the next one.